All right, welcome to the first episode of No Power Panel, a new podcast focusing on Canadian politics with some discussion of American stuff as it's necessary. I'm one of your hosts, Noam, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Isaac, and also Noam's cousin, and also don't have any power in politics.
Yeah, so that's where we're coming from. Is we're two people who enjoy watching politics and like following it, and certainly have our own opinions and perspectives on things that are happening that we want to share, but without being people who have any kind of real power in the internal mechanisms of the system.
Well, that's
I
probably. Oh yeah, I was gonna say
no,
that's
go ahead.
probably what brought us here. We both have some level of experience dealing with people in the politics and how that's how that is accepting or not accepting to the people on the inside. But
we,
and
both, we both have various amounts of experience of the not accepting as well.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
So yeah.
yeah, that's where we're at. That's what's happening, and thanks for joining us. Our plan is to put out weekly episodes talking about the biggest political news stories and sharing our perspectives. Um, I think it's safe to say that we're both quite left of center if you're talking from a ideological perspective in terms of politics, but that we also have thoughts to share with people from everywhere on the spectrum. We're going to be talking a little bit today about the state of the Conservative Party's campaign and maybe offer some free advice that they might or might not want to take. But
And I think an important note is that I don't think either of us, have partisan cloaks. On a lot of these panel shows, it's like you bring in a panel and everyone has their little team flag and their talking points. And, you've got your orange person, your red person, your blue person. And what they're if they have a official capacity within the party or not, they're a party mouthpiece essentially. And if they're acting critically or making critiques of whatever party they're up there to wave the flag for, it's all like okayed critiques from at least within a section of that partisan window. So it's like we are not coming from we're not trying to be unbiased. We're
absolutely,
going to come in with strong opinions, but they're just going to be our opinions. And
yeah.
so it's like usually you have the person who's there to be unbiased, and then you have the people there to each give their little biased mouthpiece. And I think an important perspective is the people who are going to be biased, but also not partisan.
Right.
And there's a lot of people who on, let's say, talk radio shows are going to come in acting like they're biased and nonpartisan, but they're really, partisan for, let's say, like on all the radio shows, it's all like conservatives. Like you've got Greg Brady. It's like pretty like transparent too. They all go then run for the conservatives after, even if they've, spent 20 years saying they're nonpartisan. And then
Saying they're
now
not.
you've got all the Mulroonies, like they're just appearing out of nowhere on these talk shows, like acting like they're just like independents, but just like sprouting conservative.
But they're Mulroonies.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I didn't even know
Hard
there
to
was
be in.
four of them. I thought there was two of them, and then they just keep popping up more. Apparently, there's four
I
of them.
same. I thought it was Ben and Carolyn. And
Yeah, there's
obviously,
other
like
guys now
Carolyn has
wanting to.
her. It's interesting though because Carolyn is very much throwing her hat in with the Poilievre campaign, even though
Yeah.
she is also a part of Ford World.
Yeah,
Um,
and we know that in the Ford, like there was a leak saying that like they explicitly directed their MPs, to not endorse the Conservatives, not help conservative candidates, but we can talk about that later. But
absolutely, we'll move on to that in a little bit. For the moment, we want to talk about the big news story that is currently obsessing everything and everyone and impacting pretty much every corner of the globe, which is Liberation Day.
Liberation Day, where apparently we live in a reality where a trade deficit equals a tariff. And this is the party that's good for the economy. Now we can just call anything we want a tariff and then say we're going to put on retaliatory tariffs on tariffs that don't exist. But
that's his whole philosophy. And I mean, even to the point that like one of the places that he's imposed tariffs on is literally populated only by penguins. Did you hear about this?
Yes, I saw that.
The island that is only populated by penguins and has a 10% tariff applied to it because they literally just copy and pasted some Google spreadsheet of every country and territory in the world, and we're like, everyone's got to have some level of tariff, with the exception of Russia and
Canada and Mexico, apparently, for now. But we have our other tariffs.
Well, we have some other ones.
But I do find it crazy that in about a couple hours, people were able to basically do the math equation. When you have 200 countries and you put them on a list and you say, these are our tariffs, and it all just looks like random numbers. And you can say, okay, we have 200 outputs. Let's try to find what their inputs were. And in a couple hours, people found, okay, the math equation they used for this tariff was this. So they were saying the tariff they applied. So Trump and his administration is saying the tariff that we have applied to us, we're going to do a retaliatory tariff. And they say conversion. What do you know the terminology they actually used for what they said the tariff there? It was something about like how much they're taking advantage of the U.S. Like they called them like effective tariffs, and essentially it's some input of the trade deficit. So how much the U.S. is like in a trade deficit to that country, which essentially just means that the U.S. is importing more than they're selling to them.
It's so stupid because these are it's literally these are things that the U.S. obviously needs that they are bringing
and
in.
The things they
wants.
Exactly. Well, in Canada's case, the whole reason they're in a trade deficit is because we give them oil for cheap. So it's like the reason you're buying more than exporting is because you're getting cheap oil from us. It's benefiting you, and that is a pause. That's how America has built their economy for decades.
For however long, and so much of what they export to other places is our oil that they have then refined and sold to other people. And so and if you take out that from the equation, they actually have a trade surplus with us.
Yeah, and it's literally
they're calculating the deficit.
They're calculating the deficit divided by the total amount of trade with some constant. And that is the number they're using for to say that's a tariff. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, there's absolutely no logic. And yet Republicans are still poll better on like economic issues when there's literally no there's no logic in any of it. It's crazy.
It's wild. But it's also like there's no even to the point that there are at least some Republicans who are willing to at least understand what is happening, right? Like,
there were 4 Republican senators who voted.
That's what I was about to bring up.
Yesterday in the Senate, there was a vote brought by Tim Kaine to basically say the state of emergency that Trump declared that allows him to unilaterally impose the fentanyl crisis tariffs on Canada, the tariffs
And
they
Mexico.
had imposed before, and Mexico, were is not valid, essentially. And the Senate voted on this, and for Republicans, Murkowski, Collins, and then the two Republicans from Kentucky, so Rand Paul and McConnell, which goes to show you maybe that taking the bourbon off the shelves actually did
I
have
was about
an
to
impact.
say, it's the one countermeasure that they've done that actually has done something.
I'm surprised that none of the Midwestern senators, like with all the potash that they were talking about for farming and stuff, they were kind of making a stink, but maybe because they brought those tariffs down already, that was like sufficient enough. They felt like they didn't have to do that. They already carved that out for them.
I think that that's likely what it was. I think that there was some pressure behind the scenes, and I also think that, like, if the Republican senators had any hope that Mike Johnson was going to let this get to a vote,
it's not going to get to a House vote. That's the thing. It's just a symbolic gesture at the end of the day.
You might have had more of them willing to stand up if it actually was going to result in something. But I think that there was a calculation made by a lot of them, particularly a number of the Midwestern ones that you're referencing. Of going, is it really worth to like send this signal to home but not actually have it do anything? Is that worth pissing Trump and Musk and the White House off to that degree? For something that's not going to have any end result.
Yeah, and you look at the senators that did vote for it, and they're the ones. Well, Collins and Murkowski, that's their bread and butter. That's what
that would be the expectation.
They're going to vote on this issue. And then for Kentucky, it's like a signal, like all the big business in Kentucky that basically makes or breaks, these political candidates. It's like their seat as Republicans are safe. They're never losing them. McConnell's out of Senate leadership, so it's like it doesn't matter. Like he's not like a face anymore.
He doesn't need to keep the caucus happy.
But they need to keep the business happy because that's their donors for their primaries, and they don't want to get
absolutely. And I do think I will say in terms of, without getting too deep into Kentucky politics, which I don't know a tremendous amount about, but I follow this stuff everywhere as much as possible. I do think that there is some legitimate concern around what Andy Beshear wants to do next. Because he is like the single most popular governor or one of them. And I do think that like if he wants to run for McConnell's seat in the Senate next year, which like he said he doesn't want to do, but that's happened before.
And like I don't know how like I feel like there's still some states that even though they're like hyper partisan in one direction, they can still elect like a governor,
a two-term popular governor, like, Democratic.
But then when they then go run for Senate, like it's like people like don't give them a chance. Like Senate, I feel like there used to be swing Senate states. You could be a red state and elect a blue senator. I feel like the hyper partisanship in American politics, especially at like a national level, is making that very hard. And who was it that just ran? Was it in Maryland? Someone I'm blanking on.
Larry Hogan. There was in Maryland.
Hogan, just ran for Senate, right? Is this? Or no? Yeah. And he got there was no race, even though he was winning.
No, he got like 30%
by like, even though he was winning governorships by like a lot, So it's like I feel like both that goes both ways now, and that like
absolutely. I
really
I think that there are 2 or 3 states that have a divided Senate representation, where you have one senator from the Democrats and one senator from the Republicans, and other than those couple, like Wisconsin, you have Maine. I honestly can't think of another.
Bring this back.
To bring it back.
Canadian politics, I just want to shift this if we're going to do this transition.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I do think one thing that has given me hope over the past couple months, and that, like, I don't really like either option for prime minister right now, but I like one more than the other. I think Carney is a better option than Poilievre, but I do believe that the amount of elasticity and like non-partisanship in the Canadian electorate is a very positive thing. The fact that we
Absolutely.
can have a swing, there can be external circumstances, and those external circumstances can affect an election to the point from going from a 25-point lead in one direction to about a 7-point lead in the other now. And the electorate is paying attention enough and not just like, on a team, which I think actually is where the issues with a lot of how parties treat the electorate in Canada come in, is because they take for granted partisans. They spend too much time caring about and thinking everyone thinks like them when the electorate doesn't. And doesn't actually care about the team that much, or like
Definitely.
these issues. And I think that really gives me hope. The fact that that can happen, there can be a 32-point swing from one party to the other in a couple months based on external circumstances, shows you that democracy can still work. I'm not so sure about that in the States. But I think in Canada, there's at least hope that it, is trend, like, we haven't lost all hope, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely agree. I think that there's definitely something about Canadian politics that people are still being mature adults in a lot of circumstances about. I mean, you have partisans with every party that are just diehard, never gonna leave. And you can debate what percentage of each party's support those people take up. But I think that definitely there's something really different in our politics that shows when you can have that kind of swing. And I think also in particular, when you look at the fact that that swing started before the tariff threat, like the tariff threat was there, but before it actually started becoming a reality, we started seeing this swing happen immediately after Justin Trudeau announced his
as soon as Trudeau resigned.
That was
so
the
if you have a
catalyst.
cynical look, if you want to cynically look at the electorate, you can say they're not educated because it's all based on cult of personality of like, it's Trudeau who's the problem, not like, the entire Liberal team, which is going to be the same pretty much. But that's the cynical.
But it's also like I think that the reality is somewhere in the middle. And I think that the reality also has a lot to do with Poilievre, right? I think that if we were in a situation where the conservative leader was an Aaron O'Toole kind of figure, we might not have seen the dramatic shift that we have. We might have. It's hard to know how much of it has to do with Trudeau and how much of it has to do with Carney, and how much of it has to do. That's debatable. I also think it's interesting to note that, like, once the tariff threat became very, very real, there started being polls of Liberals naming Trudeau as the leader still, where it looked like an even race. So I don't think it was
100%.
entirely. A lot of it had to do with reaction to Trump, and I think a lot of it. I think a lot of it all. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and Trudeau's approval rating went up about 15 points in his last month as leader. Like during the Liberal age, when he was getting out there and making those speeches and shown fighting back against Trump, his approval rose during that Liberal campaign when everyone knew he was leaving too. Like he left office with as high of an approval rating as he had in 2021. The last time he won an election. So like, who knows what we'd be at if he didn't resign at all. We can't speculate on that. There's no point. But I do agree that Poilievre, it's a combination of who Poilievre is and the team around him and what they got, the messages they got, and what they learned over the past few years with him as leader. They were taking advantage of the fact that Trudeau was so unlikable, that he had such low approvals, and that people were looking for change. They were just looking for a change in leader. And they went in on their...
They didn't care.
They went in on their messaging, their, extremist, their frankly, like, unlikable, like, demeanor, that kind of... all the things that make Poilievre, really appealing to about 15% of the electorate. They thought that was the reason they were getting 45% of the support of the electorate. And they're learning now, or some conservatives are learning, that was very soft and that a large portion didn't actually like that. But I think his team around him is still supporting that notion, and that's causing that infighting we're seeing right now.
I think it's in part his team around him believed that. I also think that, like, I'm seeing... So if we're moving into really talking about the conservative campaign,
and then we can talk about how the Liberals are the opposite right now. But let's talk about the conservative campaign, and then we'll talk.
I think that I've seen too much, in my opinion, talk about it as though Poilievre is is kind of being pulled in a bunch of different directions. And you have, Cory Booker and the Doug Ford people on one side kind of trying to pull him towards the
I don't think
Ford
Doug
messaging.
Ford I don't think Doug Ford's pulling Poilievre anywhere. I think Doug Ford's just trying to get Poilievre to lose. I don't think
well, maybe, but I think
Ford wants to be prime minister and is already planning for that move. But
I don't disagree with you on that at all. And that'll be an interesting conversation to have for after the election. Is there anyone who can realistically challenge Doug Ford for that leadership? But I think that from the media's perspective, at least, you have this infighting looking like you have like Ford and Tonight and people like that on one side, and you have people like Danielle Smith and stuff on another side, and you have some of the actual staffers in the campaign in various directions. And there's this kind of assumption that Poilievre is trying to figure out, based on all of this, where he's going. And then I listen to Poilievre talk, and all he wants to say is, I'm not changing direction. This is what I'm campaigning on. This is what I'm doing. And I think that there's not enough credit given to his own campaign philosophy. I think that Poilievre is someone who has been thinking about running this campaign for the last 30 years of his life. And he has planned out meticulously how he wants this to go. And it's like he's got blinders on, and he's refusing to see what is actually happening in the world. And he's just going, no, this is the way I said I was always going to run. This is what I always wanted to run talking about. And that's what I'm going to do. And it's incredibly... No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and Canadian campaigns are so short, right? Like, they require a lot of infrastructure behind them. And there's not really an ability, if the Conservatives have been planning for this campaign for, years, and it's hard to move, like, to change, even if he did want to, which I'm under the assumption he doesn't, and the people leading his campaign don't. Him and them, I think it's one and the same. When I'm talking about the people around him, they're not like some shady cabal that's like controlling him. It's like he chose them, like he's obviously, they have the same motivations he does. So him and his team, we can say, right? Like, it's like even if they did have the motivation to switch, like to change your entire messaging for a campaign and, change your entire strategy in the span of 30 days, now 26 days or 25 days, like it's almost impossible. Like it's
Absolutely.
very hard. So it's like you kind of have to just like put your head down and say, I'm gonna like power through and hope that what seemed to have been working can still working, even if you're not saying he's motivated to have that campaign, even if he didn't want to, even if he did want to change.
I think
So there's
you're
much
right,
less
and
momentum against that.
no, I think that's particularly true when you're in a situation where a couple of months ago you were 20 points up, right? It's a
Yeah.
lot. It's much easier to get to the point of saying we just need to run the race we were planning on running. Whereas you look at a situation like Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, or the Bloc Québécois, or the Green Party to an extent, or even the Liberals, and they have had to pivot in that kind of quick way because that is the only chance that they had against the juggernaut that Poilievre appeared to be. Was they looked at the situation in the world and they went, oh, this is an opportunity, and if we don't seize this opportunity, we're going to regret it. And that's a different... There's a loud truck driving by my house. 1 second.
It's always good when you're on a podcast to point out the things that are going on outside.
Yeah, and so I think that there's that element with Poilievre of just going, it's a lot easier to rationalize that kind of argument to just put your head down and run your race if it was working for you up until events transpired. If we had been in a situation where nothing had happened yesterday, where it had been another one of these, okay, we're putting it off for 2 months and whatever, then I think that there might have been a chance that Poilievre was able to pivot back.
And on that point, to talk about the party that does benefit from all of this and who have been the real winners of this campaign, which have been the Liberals,
without a doubt,
Mark Carney, they haven't even had to really formulate a campaign. Their campaign slogans, what their messaging of the campaign has been given to them. They led the first, Carney launches his campaign on The Daily Show. And, for leader, even before, like when he's just going to build his brand going into leader, which it's like been one long campaign, like his campaign.
It effectively has been,
has started then, when he started being from leader. And what's he talking about then? We will never be the 51st state, don't joke about it. Jon Stewart's giving him the layup, jokes, and then he's able to just come off as, smart, personable, and can take a joke and funny. How does he launch
that interview, if we can just pause on that interview for a second, because I think that there was a lot of criticism when he decided to launch his campaign on The Daily Show, on American television. But I think I went back and I rewatched that interview a couple of days ago. And I think it was honestly the best he has come across, the most succinct, the most likable he has come across from the very beginning. And I think a lot of that has to do with Jon Stewart. Like,
and
I just want to give that credit.
Yeah. How do you get to Canadian viewers, right? So I think what are Canadian, are they watching The Daily Show on YouTube? Because let's be honest, lots of people aren't watching TV anymore. They're watching it YouTube, right? Are they watching or are they watching The National on YouTube? So I'm looking right now, and this video has 5 million views, right? That is 5 million views. If you went to the average video of like a Rosie Barton interview, if he was going to be interviewed there, like that's maybe 150,000 views on YouTube,
maybe
versus The Daily Show, which most of its audience is not Canadian. So they have 12 million subscribers on YouTube. Sure, most of its audience is not, probably at least 10% is, like if you just look at, I think probably the same percentage of Canadians watch it as Americans. And it's just like, so that it's like, yes, you can criticize it. It's like, well, how are you going to stand for Canada when, you're going on American news? Canada, for so much of Canada is so not self-reliant. It's like, well, our media landscape is a huge part of that. It's like everyone is consuming American media. But it's like also you have to meet people where they are. So who really gives a shit, if you're
Absolutely.
like,
So I just
like
I
how what
just
it
actually
means as a
looked.
message. Yeah.
I just looked. The interview that he did with Rosie Barton during the leadership has 366,000 versus
so
the 5.4 million.
Yeah, so 15 times the amount of viewership on the Daily Show interview. And
you have to imagine that probably half of those were Canadians.
Yeah, exactly. And how does that thread continue to this election? For prime minister, well, not for prime minister, for a government, and by extension, prime minister. How does that, how does that thread continue in terms of the Liberals kind of just taking the moment, getting their Mike Myers goes on SNL and does like the elbows up, signal. That's taken on as a rallying cry, not just by Liberal partisans. Charlie Angus has taken that and is like, going to rallies and is talking about, but the Liberals have kind of taken that messaging and put it in their campaign. And their first ad they drop on social media when the election starts, the day after the election, the writ is dropped, it's with Mike Myers, obviously referencing like him on SNL, doing the same type of little banter joke he did with Jon Stewart, and talking about defending Canada.
Only using that as an opportunity to take a weapon out of the Conservatives' wheelhouse of a Ignatieff style, he didn't come back for you kind of attack.
Exactly, and he's backing Canada at a hockey rink.
Sets it up. He's talking about Canada at a hockey rink. He is quizzing Mike Myers on whether Mike Myers is Canadian enough. So they put Mark Carney in the driver's seat of determining whether somebody else is Canadian enough to kind
when they've probably both been away from Canada for the equivalent amount of time. And I think
exactly
when before the leadership race, before Carney was like kind of a known quantity in Canadian politics, or anyone saw what his brand would be, and people were talking about Carney as running for leader, that Ignatieff comparison came up so much. Everyone's bringing up the Conservatives are going to use the same attack line that they used on Ignatieff. He's just visiting. They'll run it over and over again. His wife's European. He didn't even go to school here. He left as soon as he had a successful job in Canada. He's gone to Brookfield, and all these things that they were saying were gonna be the attacks. And to be fair, the Conservatives have tried to have that attack line, but it can't stick when you are the face of the Canadian defense. So if you are the face of Canada,
when you are the prime minister,
it doesn't stick. It doesn't stick. It's not sticking like it would.
There's a reason why Carney's best days on this campaign have been the days where he has not been presenting as the Liberal leader. He has been presenting as the prime minister. Right? That effectively is their campaign strategy. The most successful campaign that the Liberals could run would be a Rose Garden strategy. Keep him in Ottawa, have him make announcements as prime minister, and those are the times where we're seeing the polls uptick. And then the American story goes away a little bit, and he gets out on the road for a little while, and you start seeing issues popping up again. Because
I think it also
he's not naturally a politician. He's a governing official, and that works very well for this moment. If I were the Liberals, though, it would make me very concerned about next time.
Yeah, and I
Because
think they just have to rely on the Liberals have to rely on a high approval rating, not to we already jump into a next campaign when this campaign still has,
no,
25 days
but
left.
that's the
But
way these political operatives think.
They have to rely on a really strong approval of their governance and obviously a defiance of Trump, but not, it's a hard balance, right? Because it's like you want Trump to be taking airtime and you want Trump to be a big bad force for them to be fighting for us against, but you don't want Trump to actually tank the economy. You don't want Trump to actually threaten annexation, or at worst, actually try annexation or try to, screw us. You don't want the lives of Canadians to get worse. And all these crises that were going to ride Pierre Poilievre in on a chariot, the housing crisis, cost of living, people really struggling day to day when we're talking about like the actual citizens of the country that were that was all gonna elect a conservative government, and that's not gonna go away, so like people are gonna have to see their lives materially get better, which is gonna be an extremely hard tightrope to walk, because it's like Trump has to be scary enough that you see the Liberals as defenders, and the scariness of Trump can't actually impact people's lives to actually make their lives worse, which it will already start having an effect with the tariffs. So it's gonna be so difficult,
No, absolutely. It's Trump presents really well for the sake of this campaign for the Liberals as a really effective leader of the opposition. The issue is going to become, once this election is over and you have the Conservatives being the opposition again, and now you're dealing with Trump not as a leader of an opposition in an election campaign, but as an actual governing force in our closest neighbor,
that is now
that you're
like
having
an
to
adversary.
deal with. That is exactly. So that's going to be where the difficulty results from for Carney, and I think a lot of it, quite honestly, is going to depend on the areas that they can win seats in and how big of a mandate they get. Right? There's a very big difference if the Liberals end up with a 300 or with a 200 seat majority.
It could be 300 if we keep going in the direction we're going.
If we keep going this direction, who knows?
So are we talking horse race now? Is this our transition?
I think we're talking horse race now, and we kind of transition in. I have 338 up here, which is, for somebody who is a progressive and a left of center person, is both like looking kind of good because you're seeing strong support for the Liberals, and at least that's not a conservative victory.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're showing 7 NDP seats and 1 Green seat.
And one thing I want to talk about that 7 NDP and 1 Green, and I followed 338 very closely through the Ontario provincial election, and something that that 338 doesn't pick up on, and for those, for anyone who might be listening, if there's anyone out there
if
there's anyone out there who's listening to this, and if there's anyone out there who's listening to this and doesn't know what 338 is, because I feel like this is something we should do at least, it is an aggregate site that basically takes all the polls, puts them into a model that takes inputs of past elections, so like where support is in every riding, and outputs from that model a expected outcome, across riding, probabilistic expected outcome at riding level results, based on polling averages, regional polling averages, and past results
Election
at the
results.
riding level. And I think what 338 missed in the Ontario election, like, so they got the polls right. So their poll expectation was correct. I'm talking in terms of the NDP. So they had going in the NDP at 19%. They had them at 18 and they got 19. So exactly correct for the percentage of the NDP. But what they missed was they were projecting the NDP at 16 seats and they won 27. So pretty much 50% more, over 50% more seat totals than that was expected. And that's because the NDP ran their campaign, a combination of things.
This is what I wanted to talk about.
How they ran their campaign, but also how just people voted. You can only give so much credit to the actual. I don't want to give any credit to the Ontario NDP campaign because it made me very mad.
It was terrible.
They were not trying to win. They put all their resources in their incumbent seats and maybe a couple they could flip, which were mostly Liberal seats that they wanted to flip, like Beaches East York. But most of their seats they were trying to defend. And that's where they put their resources. They put their resources in their London seats, their Niagara seats, their Windsor seats, and their Toronto seats they wanted to defend in some of the Ottawa ones, right? Like that.
Waterloo.
And that's where, and that's like, and they were fighting to defend. And when the team was, and they're saying, let's make our vote as efficient as possible, show how huge our presence is in our incumbent ridings, remind people why they love their incumbent NDP MPPs, and keep those.
They were trying to set themselves up so that next time they can go out and say, don't vote Liberal. We are the actual people who can stop the Conservatives.
And then now the Liberals are trying to use the people's opposition, whatever. They're both doing their strategies to set themselves up as the opposition. But when I walked around in University Rosedale, when I looked at 338, it said it was a toss-up. When I walked around the streets, it was like 90% Jessica Bell signs, So it's like on the ground, I'm like, okay, this isn't really a toss-up. Jessica Bell has the better, chance of winning. And it doesn't matter, really. But, and the people, there was strategic voting. And I think the Liberals assumed we get our poll numbers high enough, people will default to the Liberal is the anti-Ford strategic vote, and it will all fold away. What ended up happening is that, the people thought, well, in my riding, NDP is the strategic vote. They actually got that message across well enough, and they didn't lose that vote. So when the provincial-wide aggregate polling was showing a 12-point swing to the Liberals from the NDP from the last provincial election, the model can take that into account and say, okay, well, if there's this swing, the NDP only beat the Liberals by 10% in the last election. There's been this province-wide swing. They're going to lose this seat. The NDP is down 10% province-wide. There's a seat that they only beat the Conservatives by 6% in the last election. They're going to lose this seat. What ended up happening is in those northern ridings in Windsor, in London, and Waterloo, in these ridings where it was NDP Conservative battlegrounds, the NDP proved enough of a presence that people said, okay, in my riding, NDP is the strategic vote, and the Liberal vote, although it buoyed up 10% from the last election province-wide, it did not buoy up in those ridings.
No, it was specifically in the Liberal Conservative. It was specifically the Liberal. I agree with you that that's a great analysis for what happened provincially. And I think that we probably can expect something similar to happen federally. And
that's why this can miss. That's where 338 can miss, is when it doesn't take that into account, that just because a riding voted and was this close last time doesn't mean that those Canada-wide swings or regional swings are going to affect at the riding level people to move away from a party like they would.
Absolutely. I think that you're exactly right on the races where we're looking at that are NDP conservative races. I think that the likelihood is in a lot of those cases, on the local level, it's going to end up going NDP. And what has actually happened is a collapse everywhere else, right? So which is what happened provincially, is if you didn't have a popular NDP MPP incumbent provincially, then yeah, that progressive vote all coalesced behind the Liberals.
Yeah.
And that's what's likely happening here on a broader scale. So you have, all of Quebec pretty much. The progressive vote is coalescing behind
the opposite
the
of what happened in 2011.
Exactly. Similarly, in I think a lot of places in Ontario, I do expect the NDP to lose net seats. I think that
yes,
they likely will end up with fewer than in 2021, but I
think they're
wouldn't
going
be
to probably
surprised.
lose at least 10 seats.
Yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised if we were looking at a result where they're at 13 or 14 seats.
Oh yeah,
as opposed
keep
to
Pody
the
status.
7 that are currently predicted. So I mean, because
and I think
you
inside
can't.
the NDP, they're panicking right now, and their strategy, you can't underestimate what they'll do. Like the NDP will do to say, okay, we have to put all of our resources to keep official party status. You know what I mean? It's like we're gonna
No,
fight
exactly,
in
and they're
these
going to have
seats
to make some
that
calls
weaken.
about. Absolutely, and they're going to have to make some calls about which incumbents are worth investing in and which incumbents are worth saying goodbye to, particularly in British Columbia. I think that in British Columbia, we're looking at the NDP probably losing about half of their BC caucus. And I think that we're in a scenario right now where I think that, I mean, you can't convince me of a world where the NDP loses a place like Vancouver East.
Yeah.
You can't convince me of a world where the NDP loses Vancouver Kingsway.
Or even like Hamilton Center. I think like
Hamilton Center,
like Matthew
absolutely.
Green isn't losing, I don't think. Like
No.
even so it's like 338 saying that's a toss-up between LPC and NDP. I think in a seat like that's not where the Liberals, are gaining their votes at the level. I do think they will be higher, as we saw in 2015, where NDP lost everywhere to the Liberals. I do think it will buoy up, but it won't be enough to eclipse that baked in NDP support. That just will write NDP no matter what, right? Like look at the Ontario election, Sarah Jama, people thought it doesn't matter the name, it doesn't matter what the external
Hamilton
thing
Center
There's
is
just a
an
certain
NDP
part
seat
of the population that's just gonna put down NDP on that ballot.
So there's a couple, and there's kind of two different categories of seats where the NDP is going to win this time. The first one is seats like that it doesn't matter who the candidate is, it doesn't matter anything. The NDP is going to win Vancouver East. The NDP is going to win Hamilton Center. The NDP is going to win London Fanshawe, right? Like some of these seats are just baked in New Democrat seats. There's also seats where, you might have a situation where under a non-NDP incumbent, you might have the Liberals or Conservatives be able to overtake them this time. But I don't see a world where Nikki Ashton loses. I don't see a world where Peter Julian loses.
Yeah.
And you have enough, I think you have enough of both of those categories of seats across the country to end up with the NDP still having official party status. I think that my biggest criticism of the NDP campaign right now is their national messaging. Particularly their national messaging when dealing with the tariff and the Trump situation. I think that they should be doing a lot more to be emphasizing what happens when you have a wealthy elite cabal come in with what they claim to be a mandate and try to take over a government.
Yeah.
And if I were Jagmeet right now, I would be linking Mark Carney to the Trump administration in that way.
And I
would
think
be.
that's.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was thinking that's where the messaging needs to be explicit of what they're running for. We're in
Absolutely.
Canada. We work best when we have minority governments. We don't want to give one party power to do whatever they want. When we were here, it's really hard because you can't take credit for things when you're not the prime minister. But like, look what we got you when when we held the liberals to a minority. We got you pharmacare, we got you dental, even though they didn't, but that's another point.
Yeah.
That's I'm talking from a messaging point of view. It's like we
Right.
got you the $10 a day, childcare. So it's like that's that type of messaging that they're not doing, because all the campaign is saying right now is just platitudes. Like what who hurts from this? Workers. We're gonna help workers. Okay, it rings hollow when you're not saying what you're gonna do other than we're gonna put a cap on groceries. Like, you have to give people something to hold on to and prove the results and scare them, basically.
Absolutely. You know who came second to Jagmeet Singh in the last NDP leadership race?
Charlie Angus.
Charlie Angus. You know who's touring the country right now?
Yeah.
Running the kind of campaign that could actually be doing something for the NDP?
Yeah, it's
Charlie
Charlie
Angus.
Yeah.
He and this is what
I
I
watched
tried.
him speak. Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I
No, it's all
watched him
good.
speak.
This is what.
In go. You go, and
we'll
then
get the hang of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what I was trying to explain to people during that leadership race. When I saw the kind of campaign that Charlie Angus was running and the kind of campaign that Jagmeet Singh was running, and I was trying to say to people within the NDP, look, Jagmeet Singh is charismatic and he can deliver a speech and he can be flashy and he understands social media and all of these things are true. And at the same time, when you listen to what he is actually saying, it's all platitudes. It's all performative. It's not actually, he's talking in flowery language about being there for people and in it for you is the slogan this time and things like that. But there is no actual concrete, real on the ground campaign about what does that mean? What are the things that actually is going to get us? And how philosophically is the NDP different from the other parties? And I think that that's where they're really missing it. Whereas when you listen to someone like Charlie talk about those kinds of things, it is fundamentally talking about a different kind of approach to politics, to representing people, to fighting for people, that Jagmeet just fundamentally doesn't agree with. I think that Jagmeet is somebody who wants to make the current system better for people. And somebody like Charlie Angus is somebody who wants to rework the current system to make it actually into something that doesn't have the kinds of systemic issues that we were seeing have the Conservatives up ahead 25 points in the polls.
If you want to come with like an analogous, situation in the States, it's like Charlie Angus taps into that kind of like righteous anger, like that Bernie kind of taps into in terms of, versus Jagmeet is kind of run of the mill, like the things
It
he's
feels
fighting
like
for is what the
what a
liberals
Bernie Warren race would have felt like.
like. It's like
Right?
what the liberals are fighting for exactly, but a little bit more. Whatever the liberals campaign is, but a little bit more. It's like the liberals, I always say, they deliver policy on tax rebate. That's like how they're progressive in that they give tax rebates. Okay, you have this, we're gonna give you a tax rebate. The child that like the child I forget the name of the actual
The
benefit, but
Canada Child Benefit.
Canada Child Benefit. Yeah. It's like you're going to, on your taxes, get this benefit, and we can take that as a line item on our budget and give it back to people. And that's how they're working for you. We're going to have this roundabout way to give you rebate. It's how they did the fucking carbon tax, and it failed them that way because no one feels that. No one in their day to day feels a tax rebate because they feel like it's like they've lost it, now they're getting something back. It doesn't work versus like an actual structured society that provides housing, in which transit is accessible to everyone, in which you're not spending all your money to live, things like that, where there's an actual, the systems are in place so that they just work. So it's not like we're taking trimmings at the edges and giving them back to people, which is how the liberals govern. And Jagmeet is basically, for every one of those things, just saying, we'll give a little bit more. It's like, well, that's not going to win you and doesn't differentiate you enough. And that's why now you're seeing, to get back to the horse race, it's like the support is so soft because they haven't actually put forward a vision. When we see the liberals surging and they're now 6 points ahead of the conservatives when they were 20 points, the conservatives have maybe dropped 2 or 3 points from their peak. It's like they're taking all their support from the Bloc and from the NDP. And that's because it's so soft. Most of the NDP's support can vote liberal because what's the difference? Why do I care if I'm voting either one if they're not different? And a candidate like Charlie Angus, who's tapping into that, that righteous anger at the system, he comes from that punk background. That's like that F the system, we're going to burn it all to the ground thing. It's also the thing where the NDP candidates have the most carte blanche to have that when they're in safe ridings. So, like a Matthew Green can support that because it doesn't matter. But they're not letting at a national level that take over the party because they're trying to quote liberal voters. But as we said, the Canadian electorate is very elastic. They see it as, we need support. It's going to come from the liberals. We have to get them liberals to vote for us. But then what happens? It makes you a nothing party. As soon as the liberals are strong again, you lose all your support back to them. Happened in 2015. It's going to happen again in 2025. It's like Groundhog Day. And they're not learning that, like,
they're not learning that what they
change and they'll vote for appealing policy.
and that the electorate, what the electorate is looking for, I think that we can kind of definitively say over the last couple of years, is they're looking for somebody who gets it, who talks to them where they're at, and who is willing to propose a bold vision, right? Like Poilievre, for all of his faults, he appealed to quite a few NDP voters.
And the NDP can get as many voters from the conservatives as they can from the liberals. Like,
absolutely,
it's not like they have to get everything
ideology.
From the yeah,
it's not about ideology. It's about people seeing, okay, this person connects with me. This person feels real. And it's not enough to change Jagmeet's outfit from a 3-piece suit to a sweater vest.
No.
To show that. That's not what it's about. It's about the fact that both the conservatives and the liberals in this campaign are promising fundamental change and are promising to address things that Canadians are top of mind right now. They're not necessarily the same things, but they are, the conservatives are appealing more on cost of living issues. The liberals are appealing more on tariff issues and economic restructure.
And to that point, people... to that point about like cost of living versus tariffs, I just want to really drill down on this idea that like a party like the NDP can get the conservative support of what we're calling for this election, conservative voters. If we look at the last Leger poll, right? Like, so I'm looking at the age breakdown of the last Leger poll. In the 18 to 34 age range, the conservatives are at 40%, the liberals are at 37, and the NDP at 12. Okay? And that 18 to 34 has been the NDP's bread and butter, for years, right? They won that by a lot in 2011. If we look at 55 plus, the Liberals are up 18 points. 52% for the Liberals, 34% for the Conservatives, 4% for the NDP. So what do we see here? We see older voters who have homes, who are sitting on millions of dollars of assets, who aren't affected by cost of living. They're driven by other motivating factors. Right now, it's patriotism. Right now, it's who can keep our country. I like Canada. I have this sense of identity to Canada. Who can protect me? That's a lot of what that is coming from in that older age range. And they do not care at all about housing. It doesn't matter for the most part. I'm making huge sweeping generalizations. There are a lot of people over 55.
No, it's true though.
There are a lot of people, but I want to talk just be frank, about what's motivating that young people swing to the conservatives. Well, it's because life has gotten worse for them in the last 10 years. All this messaging Poilievre has done has worked. And it's also because it's true. Yeah. The liberals don't give a shit if you have a home or not. And you are, the liberals, 30 years old.
So the liberals are not interested. The liberals are not interested in true systemic change, right? Mm-hmm. Like it or hate it, Poilievre for the last number of years has been talking about real systemic change. He's been talking about turning over the system and pressing the restart button.
The liberal supporters don't want.
You might not like his solutions, but at least he's going to do something. And Jagmeet is not somebody who's interested in that kind of systemic change. He's just not. He is somebody who believes in the systems in the way that the Liberal Party does. And the NDP does well when it has a leader who, you look at the most successful NDP leaders in history. Tommy Douglas, Ed Broadbent, and Jack Layton are like the three NDP leaders who gave the party rises at various times. And they are three people who all talked about politics in a kind of real kitchen table. We're going to change things in the way that the system works for you.
Yeah.
And that's when the NDP does well. And that's not what they have right now. So their support is bleeding into the Liberals. Because you're right, people are going, well, if I can vote Liberal or Liberal left, I'm going to vote Liberal.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not doing, and the few places where they are differentiating themselves no one sees it as like actual solution. So it's like, where are they trying to differentiate ourselves? When Jagmeet Singh is talking about Galen Weston and the big, grocers taking money and they're going to cap the price of groceries, people are like, I never feel anything. I don't feel like he actually cares. It feels like he's just selling me this. And it also doesn't feel real at all. It's like, substantively, what are you're going to nationalize grocery chains? It doesn't feel like.
Well, anything, okay, then say that. Right, at least that would be something.
Don't just say these mean old Westerns don't care about
people.
Working
it's the
people.
Fact that he's trying to sell us on the fact that we dragged Galen Weston before this parliamentary committee and asked him these hard to answer questions, and it's but you didn't actually do anything. You didn't go into a Loblaws and say, I'm not leaving until you've lowered the prices. You didn't, right? There are acts of civil disobedience that the NDP could be doing that would actually get people's attention.
You held the balance of power in Parliament. Like,
Yeah.
you had as much power as the NDP has possibly ever had, arguably, like at a
Mhm.
national level,
Absolutely.
and you didn't deliver anything real. Like,
Really. You
yes, you
okay,
can
dental
say you
care a little
delivered
bit.
dental care, but it wasn't enough, and it was done in such a way where people aren't gonna feel it, just like they didn't feel the carbon tax rebate. Like,
No.
no one's going into a dentist like they go into a doctor with an OHIP card and saying, I didn't pay a bill today. And until that is that fundamental emotional feeling and you deliver that for people, they're not going to see their lives as different. They're not going to
Absolutely.
budget differently, and they're not going to feel like they can actually go to the dentist when they might not have before, because they now can pay with their health card. And as much as they can say, mental health care and pharmacare and dental care, you should not be paying with your credit card, you should use your health card. Great sayings. Like, the Ontario NDP is doing it, the federal NDP
We
is trying to
agree
do it.
with it.
No one has felt it. No one's felt it. So they can't support it until that's actually
No.
been the reality. Point blank.
Exactly. And it's one of those things that, like, if I were Jagmeet Singh, I don't understand why he hasn't been calling Wob Canoe publicly
Mhm.
every couple of weeks and saying, "Hey Wob, when are you going to make that happen in Manitoba?"
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Like the NDP
Until it's
doesn't
that
do
one
enough to
province
they
that
don't do
had it.
enough.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. Like with Medicare, the NDP
exactly.
doesn't do enough to hold themselves accountable. There's
Mhm.
a there's such a fear of infighting within the party that, like, if
Yeah.
Jagmeet Singh really wanted to be successful as the federal leader, his job would have been to go to the NDP governments in Manitoba and British Columbia and say, "Hey, we're going to make some fundamental change. I'm going to come down and pressure you from your federal party,
Mhm.
and as your federal leader, and I'm going to hold rallies outside of your Capitol buildings with
Yeah.
NDP activists that helped elect you, trying
Yeah.
to get you to actually do some of these changes." And then I bet you the NDP support federally would have done something massive.
Well,
Um,
what's happened in this election, right? Like, they had an opportunity when Trudeau was polling at 18%, 17%. That, like, it's like that liberal
that
support
was the
shifted to
chance.
shifted to the conservatives, and then not a lot of that conservative support actually shifted back from the liberals. Some of it did, but then more NDP support shifted to the liberals, bloc support shifted to the liberals, and it's like, you could have cemented yourself as the opposition, and it could have been seen as that two-horse race between the NDP and the Conservatives. The Liberal leadership
Absolutely.
wouldn't matter. It would be a Kim Campbell situation, dead man walking. It's irrelevant. And
Yeah,
then you take that lane, you take the Canadian defense worker defense lane, and then you're off to the races. They lost that window. It's gone. The Liberals, it became a liberal conservative race. Then all your support's gone. I think
that's where it
it's we
happened.
can overcomplicate it, but I think at the end of the day, like,
I
that
think
was
that
their
that's where we're at.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I want to close us out by doing something a little different. Because we've been talking about kind of the need to be fighting as politicians and that kind of thing. And I had quite a moving experience this week. I don't know if you paid attention to this at all. But Cory Booker, uh, who is a United States Senator from New Jersey, broke the all-time record for a filibuster on the floor of the United States Senate.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a record that had previously been held by Strom Thurmond, filibustering the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Um, and I was incredibly moved and incredibly touched watching. I watched more of it than I probably should have live as it was happening. Um, but it was incredibly moving as he got closer and closer to breaking the record. To be aware that this black man, uh, passionate senator, was about to break this record. So in particular, he in the closeout, he he talked specifically, the part that I want to talk about is that he talks specifically about am I screen sharing with you? Can you see this?
I can, but it's black.
Okay.
Like I can't see anything.
View tab. Here. Add to stage. There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, now I can see it.
Okay. So this is Cory Booker specifically. He weaved into the filibuster talking about John Lewis. And this was kind of a part of how he closed it out that I wanted to play to kind of give that little bit of inspiration as we sign off and move on to whatever will be happening next week when we talk. So here is Cory Booker talking about John Lewis.
The power of the people is greater than the people in power. It is time to heed the words of the man I began this whole thing with, John Lewis. I beg folks to take his example of his early days where he made himself determined to show his love for his country at a time the country didn't love him, to love this country so much, to be such a patriot that he endured beatings savagely on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, at lunch counters, on freedom rides. He said he had to do something. He would not normalize a moment like this. He would not just go along with business as usual. He wouldn't know how to solve it. But there's one thing that he would do that I hope we all can do that I think I did a little bit of tonight. He said for us to go out and cause some good trouble, necessary trouble, to redeem the soul of our nation. I want you to redeem the dream. Let's be bold in America, not to mean and degrade Americans, not divide us against each other. Let's be bolder in America with a vision that inspires, with hope that starts with the people of the United States of America. That's how this country started. We, the people. Back to the ideals that others are threatening. Let's get back to our founding documents, that those imperfect geniuses had some very special words at the end of the Declaration of Independence. It was one of the greatest in all of humanity declarations of interdependence. When our founder said we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We need that now from all Americans. This is a moral moment. It's not left or right, it's right or wrong. Let's get in good trouble. My friend and President, I yield the floor.
Well,
so that go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, let's get in good trouble.
I like that. Let's get in some good trouble. All right. Thanks for joining us for the first episode of No Power Panel. I've been Noam.
Yeah, and thank you, Isaac, from Isaac, I guess.
All right. Have a good one. See you next week.